How many people do you foresee for this session?
So basically, we have 67 participants who are attending this course on ecology, environment, and sustainability with us.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So is this a modular course? Is it in modules you were explaining before?
Yes. We have different modules in this. As I have told you, this is the like this was a 1 month long course.
My colleague is having issues.
Hello, Dr. Yuan. I'm Naveen from Department of Environmental Studies. I think Dr. Neha is having some trouble on her end with the network. So, as you asked, that this is not a regular course that we are running. This is a 1 month certificate course that we have designed, for this online module. So, this whole course is run on online basis, and we have 4 different sections. One of them is green. One of them is the climate change and global climate change, basically. So we are really glad to have you once again. I would also like to welcome you to the Indraprastha College and to University of Delhi. And I think she would be joining again. So this is not a regular course. It is a 1 month certificate course. It's an online certificate course that we have been running for this session.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, and nice meeting you, Narvin. And it's actually very...
Same here, same here.
Yeah, we're very happy that we were invited, and it's very useful for us also for other people to get to know better what we do in the fund. We're a relatively new institution, so it's for us a good opportunity as well to share some knowledge and experiences.
In fact, the title of your talk is really very interesting: nature-based solutions for climate change mitigation, and I'm really looking forward to listening to you and your ideas, and I'm sure that all the participants are also going to benefit immensely from your talk.
Yeah. We look, hopefully, yes, we look forward for that as well. And yeah, I see that my colleague is it, I mean, do you have a person in the IT services?
We don't have any person in IT services. Usually we manage things on our own. We are doing it on
Okay.
our own. I don't think setting up a Google Meet or doing this is really that difficult.
Okay. My colleague is asking if there's a need to create a Google account to be able to
She
access.
doesn't need to create a Google account. All she needs is to
She's
click on
here.
that link. And if she doesn't have a Google account, then one of us will admit her into this meeting. So we haven't seen any of her requests. All she need to do is to click on the link which was sent to her as an invite. And we will get a notification here to admit her into the meet, and we will accept that. I think she's there. Yeah.
Yeah, she's here. Hi. Hi, Anastasia.
Hello. I'm sorry, I didn't think about it. I need a Google account for that. I'm so used to Microsoft Teams and Zoom, and
Yeah.
Welcome.
thank you very much.
Great.
You're perfectly audible. Thank you so much again, Juan and Anastasia, for being here with us today and for accepting our invite. We'll just start in 2 minutes.
Yes,
As the participants will be coming till 2:30. So
Yeah. Yes, I mean, just for a matter of logistics, as I was explaining, maybe I will give a very broad introduction of ourselves, of the institution, and then my colleague Anna will provide the first part of this session, which is an introduction to the topic. Then I'll go into more detail of what the institution does and some examples that we have done so far with nature-based solutions.
okay. So I think ma'am is here. We have ma'am with us now? Okay. So very good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Department of Environmental Studies, Indraprastha College for Women, University of Delhi, I would like to welcome you all. First of all, I would like to welcome the speakers of today's session, Dr. Juan Chang and Dr. Anastasia Tikhonova, Coordinator, Center for Earth Studies, Dr. Anindita Roy Saha, all the faculty members attending this session with us, and all the participants. Welcome, everyone. And today, as all of us know here, that we are entering the fourth and the final theme of this online certificate course in ecology, environment, and sustainability. The theme of this week is global climate change and waste management. So, we are starting today this theme, inaugurating with a special lecture by Dr. Juan Chang and Anastasia Tikhonova. So, now I would like to request our coordinator, Dr. Anindita Roy Saha, to welcome our guest speakers of today's session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Mishra. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Juan Chang and Dr. Anastasia Tikhonova to this course on ecology, environment, and sustainability that we are running on the platform of an open online course at Indraprastha College for Women, University of Delhi. The Department of Environmental Studies in this college, Indraprastha College for Women, is an undergraduate women's college under the University of Delhi. The Department of Environmental Studies is organizing this course under the aegis of the Center for Earth Studies, which is a research and learning center of the college. The college has 7 such research and learning centers, and the one which is focused on ecological conservation, environmental sustainability, and other developmental issues is the Center for Earth Studies. As the coordinator of the center, it's my honor and privilege to welcome the 2 eminent speakers of the day. And I'm sure with their experience and knowledge, they will contribute immensely to this course. And also all our endeavors that we try to have in our college. Within our limited scope of work, we dream big and we try to do whatever we can towards sustainable development for our own and common future and common existence on the planet. So we have several such projects and activities which we organize under the Center for Earth Studies. And the Department of Environmental Studies is the pivotal department of the center. And starting from tree sensors, bird diversity sensors to waste management, we try to do our little bits in whichever way possible towards, global issues. So this course is one of those endeavors, and we are very happy to share with you that participants of this course have come from all over India. Students at undergraduate level, students at the postgraduate level, and researchers are participating in this course. And I'm sure they are eager to listen to the 2 eminent speakers of the day. Dr. Juan Chang is the Deputy Director AI of the Division of Mitigation and Adaptation and Principal Forest and Land Use Specialist of the Green Climate Fund. Green Climate Fund is a fund under the UN FCC, if I'm not wrong. He previously served for 4 years as Senior Specialist in Forests and Climate Change for the Inter-American Development Bank, in charge of promoting and coordinating climate change investments in forestry and land use sector in Latin America. And prior to joining the IDB, he worked as forestry and climate change auditor with the company Tufsud, where he audited climate change forestry projects in more than 20 countries. These countries span over Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and it is since 2007 that he has been doing it. Before becoming a forestry and climate change auditor, he worked in development and implementation of biodiversity conservation projects and management of protected areas in Peru, accumulating 20 years of work experience. So with your huge experience, I'm sure you will be giving us directions and also suggestions for our activities in future. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Anastasia Tikhonova. Dr. Anastasia Tikhonova is supporting in the Division of Mitigation and Adaptation in the Green Climate Fund in project management. She is also Sustainable Agriculture Consultant in Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO. She has a PhD in Environmental Sciences and Policy from Central European University and a vast experience in the areas such as climate change mitigation, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction in agriculture. So we are honored to have both of you here. One person with huge experience, Dr. Juan Chang, and Anastasia. I think she's a young enthusiast and a future who will be leading us towards various things. So welcome to both Dr. Juan Chang and Dr. Anastasia Tikhonova. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much for that great introduction. We are very honored to be part of this presentation on this online course. We appreciate very much the invitation by the University of Delhi. Very kind words, Ms. Anidita, for introducing us. And so we will try to make this presentation not so dense. It's a very, probably too many slides, but we will try to make it dynamic. Feel free to jump at any point if you have any questions, any doubts. If you want to make a comment, just intervene at any point, and we'll be happy to discuss. And so it will follow like this. My colleague Anna will provide a general introduction of nature-based solutions, the context, the framework, the theory around that. Then I will follow with more details of what is the Green Climate Fund doing about it, or what's the relevance of nature-based solutions in the fund, and then more concrete examples to taste what actually that means in practical terms. And with that, I will now pass the voice to my colleague Anna, please, and I will run the presentation.
Thank you very much, Juan. Yes, it's also my pleasure to deliver the first part of this lecture for this online course, and hopefully you will enjoy it. Yes, Juan, please, could you please make a screen view? Oh, okay, let it be like this. All of you probably know that climate change today is not an abstract future risk anymore. It is already happening. All the sectors of our activities like agriculture, forestry, water management, healthcare, city planning, transport, tourism, and others are affected by its negative impacts. And these fields need to really adapt to changes in climate and also to contribute to decreasing greenhouse gases through various appropriate measures. So climate change mitigation and adaptation is something urgent and should be seriously considered. Ecosystems play an important role in this process as they provide the basis for life through their numerous functions. Hopefully you can read from this slide. If not, I can list them. So they help sequester and store carbon. They maintain local climate and improve air quality. They help stabilize slopes and shorelines and protect coasts. They control floods and prevent erosion. They help keep soil fertile and provide pollination. They control pests and diseases. They provide food and raw materials, fresh water and medicine, and they ensure genetic diversity, and they are essential for tourism and recreation activities. Yet ecosystems also have to adapt to long-term changing temperatures and rainfall patterns, which is only possible if they remain healthy and stable. Degraded ecosystems are not capable of providing many services which are crucial for human life. The maintenance, restoration, and sustainable use of ecosystems, therefore, form the basis of nature-based approaches to climate change mitigation and adaptation. Nature-based approaches are often called no-regret options, meaning that the measures are useful even if the effects of climate change never happen as it was predicted. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. So here you can see the definition given by the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN. So it states that nature-based solutions are actions to protect, sustainably manage and restore natural or modified ecosystems which address societal challenges effectively and adaptively, simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. We can distinguish two types of nature-based solutions, and these are already existing natural areas that can be used to provide ecosystem services and protected and cared for to conserve and increase biodiversity, and those that can be designed and constructed to support the ecosystem for a given purpose. Next slide, please. Here are some examples of nature-based solutions, such as protecting forests and wetlands and catchments, which can help secure and regulate water supplies, support production of forest products, and protect communities and infrastructure from floods, soil erosion, and landslides. Next one is restoring coastal ecosystems such as mangroves, reefs, and salt marshes in order to protect communities and infrastructure from storm surges, saltwater intrusion, and erosion. Then we have bring green and blue infrastructure into cities to help with cooling and flood abatement, while reducing air pollution and providing other major health benefits. Planting trees among crops and crops among trees to stabilize or enhance yields in dry and more variable climates. Next slide, please. So when we talk about nature-based climate change mitigation, we mean that ecosystems are used to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to conserve and expand carbon sinks. In nature-based climate adaptation, the goal is to preserve ecosystem services that are necessary for human life and to help reduce negative impacts of climate change, like more intense rainfall, more frequent floods, heat waves, and droughts. Both approaches are increasing the resilience of ecosystems and so stabilize the provisioning of important services. What is needed for this is to strengthen functional relationship within the ecosystems and between species in order to increase their resilience. These can be achieved through various measures like with sustainable use alongside the protection and the regeneration of ecosystems. It often happens that nature-based approaches combine climate change mitigation, adaptation, disaster risk reduction, biodiversity conservation, and sustainable resource management. But let us look into some details. Next slide, please. The recent IPCC special report found that around 23% of global greenhouse gas emissions released over the last decade came from agriculture, deforestation, peatland degradation, and other types of land use. At the same time, it is estimated that land carbon sinks stored around 28%. So, by better ecosystem stewardship, we can secure these carbon stocks such as grasslands, forests, wetlands, coastal habitats, peatlands, and agricultural lands, including soils, like this enhancing climate change mitigation. For example, tidal flats that are intact or are recreated via the relocation of dikes can sequester up to 2.2 tons of CO2 per hectare. Restoration of peatlands can reduce emissions as much as by 10 to 20 tons of CO2 per hectare. Most widely cited estimate is that globally, nature-based solutions would reduce net emissions and provide up to 30% CO2 mitigation needed by 2030 to keep warming below 2 degrees Celsius. And within tropical nations, this potential is much higher. Next slide. Now let us look into nature-based adaptation. First, we need to figure out what is it that enables nature to resist to and recover from climatic shocks? And these are connectivity, which allows species to migrate to more favorable conditions, and ecological niches to shift as an adaptive response to climate change. And the second is diversity. It is species richness that safeguards evolutionary potential, diversity of all kinds, functional redundancy, meaning that certain species contribute in similar ways to an ecosystem function, and so one species may substitute for another. And all this increase resilience of ecosystems and their ability to provide ecosystem services in spite of whatever changes happen. Today, there is good evidence that biodiverse and well-connected ecosystems can accommodate climatic extremes, pathogens, and migration. Next slide, please. More resilient systems also have larger potential for disaster risk reduction. Such ecosystems as wetlands, mangroves, dunes, and coral reefs can be effective in reducing disaster risk for vulnerable communities. In the Philippines, for example, mangroves mitigate the impact of flooding for more than 500,000 people per year and avert more than $1 billion in damages. Similarly, coastal wetlands on the US eastern coast reduce damages from Hurricane Sandy by an estimated $625 million US. Until recently, most flood management was done through engineering measures, which we usually call hard engineering or green infrastructure. Examples are like building embankments, dams, levees, and channels to control flooding. Currently, we start also using nature-based solutions for that. As I already mentioned, nature-based solutions can be completely green, meaning consisting of only ecosystem elements, or then they can be hybrid, combining ecosystem elements and hard engineering approaches. And it's been proved that nature-based solutions can effectively and economically reduce risk and simultaneously create a lot of benefits for other sectors, including tourism, environment, and housing, and provide livelihoods for local communities. For example, restoration and expansion of coral reefs can be an alternative or addition to the construction of tropical breakwaters for coastal flood management. Coral reefs are often much cheaper than breakwaters, and they can reduce waves by 92% and offer large potential for tourism and income, also livelihoods for local fisheries, and important biodiversity benefits. Similarly, the integration of parks and other green spaces in cities can help reduce peak runoff and urban flooding, while improving quality of life, reducing air pollution, and increasing land value. Next slide, please. There is one more very important advantage of nature-based solutions. They are cost-effective. For example, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions through peatland restoration can be up to 14 times cheaper than achieving the same reductions through technical carbon capture and storage. Furthermore, urban green spaces can generate economic values of up to €600 per hectare per year due to the cooling energy that they save, which would otherwise have to be technically produced. The building and operation costs for a water treatment plant can also be significantly higher than the cost of preserving or restoring wetlands, which naturally regulate water quality and supply. Through the preservation and expansion of natural water basins, we're not only able to provide drinking water at a lower cost, but we can also address the increasing water scarcity due to climate change. Next slide, please. And again, nature-based solutions usually generate multiple benefits. For example, floodplain restoration of the river Elbe and its tributaries have a total economic benefit of $1.2 billion and a cost-benefit ratio of 1 to 3. Amongst others, the benefits include protection from flood damage, improved living conditions for wild species, reflooding of carbon-rich soils, reduction of nutrient loads, and landscape improvements. Next slide, please. So, nature-based solutions present a lot of advantages in many aspects, and it is a familiar practice because humans have been working with nature for millennia. And now, developing countries do not have extensive networks of infrastructure or institutions to rebuild like those in the developed world. So for them, sustainable practices can be incorporated into their present and upcoming economic and overall growth. Shifting to investment in green energy, water use, resource recovery, and nature conservation is more sustainably viable than trying to quickly reach developed status through the traditional and degrading industrial practices. Moreover, governments could include nature-based solutions in the sustainable policies being created for their respective countries. And today is really a global political momentum to implement nature-based solutions. Next slide, please. With the Paris Agreement, which calls to ensure the integrity of all ecosystems, including oceans, and the protection of biodiversity, and with numerous other international and regional initiatives. As of today, already 66% of countries signatories to Paris Agreement included nature-based solutions in their nationally determined contributions, either for reducing greenhouse gas emissions or adapting to the impacts of climate change. Next slide, please. More than 70% of countries include a mention on land use change, and forestry in NDCs. Next slide, please. Here you have the link for your information on the methodological assessment report on scenarios and models of biodiversity and ecosystem services that you can access. I believe the presentation will be shared. Next slide, please. So, in spite of all said, we need more efforts if we want to really scale up and realize the potential of nature-based solutions. And this will require generating shifts in both domestic and international governance and in finance for nature-based solutions, ensuring that financial mechanisms are supported with appropriate regulations and enforced at national and subnational levels. We also should avoid financing deforestation and other activities that harm ecosystems. And we need to increase public and private investments in nature-based solutions, promote green finance and innovative incentive measures. And now about how a Green Climate Fund is helping with this, will tell my colleague Juan. Juan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Anastasia. It was super great. But let me spend maybe 5 minutes here to ask our audience a yes or no question. Are you or were you familiar with the concept of nature-based solutions before this presentation? You can just type in the chat box yes, no, and it will be enough. No one? Okay. Okay, thank you. Well, that's interesting. And okay, yes, some people do have some familiarity. Some others may not. And it's actually interesting because, as Anastasia was mentioning, it's nothing new that we rely on nature to sustain our livelihoods. And the concept has been changing over time, since before it was used to call natural resources management, sustainable natural resources, and probably quite a few other terms were used. But what is happening now, what is different today, is the political momentum that, as Anastasia was also mentioning, countries are realizing the need to take into account nature as part of our development. So I think what happened over time was that we thought nature was for granted, that was for free, that it doesn't have a cost, that we can just take the water as we need, or take the wood from the forest as we need, without realizing or without consciously taking into account the implications of not doing that in a manner that would provide long-term benefits, environmental and social benefits. It happens also that the way the population has been distributed nowadays, most of the population in the world are concentrated in the cities. So we probably feel less connected to nature, and we just demand more products. People go to, let's say, to the market and just buy as you can food or provision, but not necessarily taking into account where does it come from, whether it came from sustainable sources, whether it was the production was based on as a consequence of deforesting the land. So, but now we're realizing that, and we realize it in the context of climate change and mitigation and adaptation. So this is where the GCF comes into play. And again, you can interrupt at any point if you have any questions. The GCF means the Green Climate Fund. It's a relatively new organization based in South Korea. This is the building actually where I'm sitting today. It is located in a area which is a very new development called Songdo, and was created in 2010 under the frame of the agreements under the UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And it became operational in 2015 because it was created, but it took a time until funds were raised by donors. And in 2015, we were able to start implementing. The first replenishment was around 10 billion that was spent between 2015 and last year, 2019. And the fund has received additional funding of another 9.7 billion US dollars for the next 4 or 5 years. Okay, so the GCF, as mentioned, it's born under the frame of the UNFCCC with a mandate to be the entity that implements the decisions under the convention, taking into account the needs of developing countries to address climate change. And most of countries who have submitted their nationally determined contributions, are you familiar with that concept, NDCs? Well, basically, it's, under the Paris Agreement, countries need to commit how much effort they will do to achieve climate change. So it's not only a one-side solution. Is every single country in the world who is a party of the Paris Agreement, should indicate how they will address climate change mitigation and adaptation. And what is very important in the GCF, and this is a concept that I will come back to, the objective is to promote a paradigm shift to low emissions and climate resilient development. This is the objective and the mandate. That's why the fund was created. And yes, I'll come back to this. This is a very important concept that links to all the previous discussion that Anastasia was mentioning. So as mentioned very briefly, the fund started in 2010. It was born under the convention, and only in 2015 we started approving projects. By 2018, we had more than 100 projects. And today, actually, this is not updated, I'm sorry, but today we have 140 projects, I guess, and more than 8 billion of approvals, and most of them are being implemented. So what is unique about this fund is that it relies on partnerships. The fund operates based on partners. So we don't execute the funds. We rely on agencies that are in the countries that have offices in other parts for them to execute the projects. But they operate based on the demand by the countries. The countries will provide an endorsement. That's why it says country-driven. The countries need to demand what they need. It's different to a top-down approach. The expectation is that the countries themselves identify their needs, and based on a partnership, they bring proposals to the fund. And it's very flexible. As it's a new institution, still the options for how the fund will provide support are very diverse, from providing technical assistance for the countries to prepare their capacities, to improve their capacities to manage funds, to the investment themselves, to bring private sector. And this is where it takes the risk. We need to take the risk. It's because in many cases, in particular in nature, this is an area where private sector is very not comfortable with because of the risks involved. I will put an example in, let's say in forestry. You plant a tree, it will take 20 years, 25 years until the trees are big enough to be sold and have a return. So if I were an investor, I will go for an investment that is much short-term option. Maybe I will buy a cab, a taxi, or something else. So I don't see investments in nature as attractive as in other types of investments. So this is the mission of the GCF. If we want to encourage more private sector intervention, we can take that risk that they don't want to take. So they provide, we leverage their resources. I'll put some examples on this. So how it's designed, the fund will support mitigation and adaptation. The funds are expected to be shared 50% for mitigation and 50% for adaptation. And there's a particular emphasis on in Africa countries, least developed countries, small islands and development states for adaptation. So as I mentioned, we have more than 100 projects in more than 100 countries. And here's where nature-based solutions lie in the GCF. So we have priorities, have 8 priority areas in mitigation and in adaptation. In mitigation, we have energy, transport, building, cities, and forest and land use. So we reduce emissions from these sectors. And in adaptation, we have health, livelihoods, ecosystems, and infrastructure, and built environment. So when we look at nature-based solutions, it is embedded in 4 of the 8 priorities of the fund: in forests, in health, water security, in livelihoods, ecosystem, and ecosystem services. So it is a priority for the fund. This is what I was saying. We work with our partners who are the accredited entities who bring the projects, and these are designed at the country level. This is where we are today. I just updated this today, 143 projects. And the number of people that would benefit from these investments are almost 400 million people, and 6.2 billion funds being committed. Okay, this is the point that is, for me, the most important part of the fund. Why this fund is unique? Because the intention is to promote this paradigm shift towards a low emissions development. The thing with nature-based solutions is that, as we were saying before, it has not been embedded into our development. And actually, maybe I have this presentation here. Okay, this has how the forests have changed over time. And this has, let me see if I can put, can you still see my presentation? Okay, here. Can you see how the forests are changing over time?
Yes.
Okay, so this is what happened in just taking forests as an example. Okay, when population grows, the demands for land, for agricultural area also increases. but there's not much space for that. Therefore, the people tend to change the forest for other land uses, and this is what happened now. And what we have today is a mosaic of different land uses, where we have small patches of forest that have less impact, but in most cases, most of the forests in the world have been already transformed to agriculture, pasture, or just been heavily deforested that was not able to recover. Now, when we look at in a graph, probably you've seen this graph before, but this is an example of what happened with the forests in the world. And I'm focusing on forests because that's what I'm that's my main area of expertise. So I will explain a bit more about forests and not on other ecosystems. But it doesn't mean that other ecosystems are not important. It's just because I have more to say about this. So what happened in the world with the forest is like this. We can see this in this graph. You see at the beginning of the graph here. In this part, we see that there are countries like the Congo Basin or North Amazon Basin and some countries in the Amazon that still haven't experienced much deforestation. But if they follow the same trend of development as other countries, let's say as Europe, North America, South Asia, North Asia, they will lose their forests. And this is what happened in the world, actually. Let's say this is the example of India. In my previous lives, I was able to evaluate many projects in India. And I went to see one project in the south, in Odisha. Yeah, in Odisha. It was a plantation. And when looking at the data, what happened in India, I'm sure, and please correct me if I'm wrong, most of the needs of pulp and paper demanded heavily natural forests. So forests were used a lot besides other needs for like fuel wood and others. And there was an increase, and here you see an increase of the forest cover later, but it doesn't mean that the nature restores by itself. In the case of India, large portion of the forest has increased because of supply for pulp and paper. So the timber is eucalyptus, pinus. It's not the same natural forest that was before. So this is what happens and what happened in many countries. In Europe and North America, it was cheaper to import wood from, let's say, Southeast Asia compared to using their own forests. So the forest was regrown. In some parts, the forest was transformed so much that now it looks like a plantation and not like a natural forest. So this is what a paradigm, when I was saying paradigm shift, this is like the paradigm that happens. And if you want to shift the paradigm, it would look like this. A paradigm is that the countries will continue losing their forests as long as they increase their development. But if we want to change that paradigm, countries should continue increasing their economies and continue their development, but not losing their forests. Another critical element of paradigm shift is on nature, is that we don't value all the services that we get from nature. The moment when we take into account the importance of pollination, when we buy a coffee, for example, that coffee, the plant had to be pollinized by a bee, but we don't care, we're not paying attention to the bees. This is an ecosystem service that comes from nature. On the contrary, what we're doing the most is cutting all possible ways for these bees to reproduce and to be able to provide a service. On the contrary, and we just don't take it into account. The paradigm shift would be whenever we buy a cup of coffee, we will be actually paying for that service, and that is helping the nature to maintain that processes. This is an example how we can see that it is possible to shift the paradigms. This is an example in Brazil. The blue line here means the agricultural production that happens over several years. And when there is more agriculture, there's more deforestation. The green one is deforestation. So there's a point in which the government decided to stop deforestation and put strong measures, and then deforestation started decreasing. So the agricultural production also decreased because there was less land available and so on. But at the same time, the government was giving incentives in Brazil to improve the productivity of the land. So at some point, deforestation kept decreasing, but the agricultural production started increasing without causing deforestation. This is the example of paradigm shift. This is when the paradigm, which is this one, has more agriculture, more deforestation, shifted to more agricultural production and less deforestation. Of course, this is a very fragile concept because in Brazil, and this is example, this is 2010, but in the last 2 years, 2017, 18, deforestation in Brazil increased dramatically, and it was because of political reasons. So if we want to understand what is needed to shift this paradigm, we need to have, this is just an idea. This is just based on our experience here. But at least what needs to happen in a country to make sure that you have this paradigm shift, that nature will be maintained, you need to have long-term political will. That is not only a matter of a promise or a short term or a one project, but this needs to happen over time. And this is a very challenging situation because in most of the countries, because of the political processes, we have a high rotation of our politicians and our presidents or prime ministers or whatever. So sometimes the next one coming to govern doesn't necessarily follow the same policies as the previous one, but nature takes time. In order to restore an ecosystem, in order to allow these ecosystem processes to keep being provided, it requires time. And that's why you need to have a long-term political will. But also you need to be very strategic how to plan. What we've seen in many cases is that there are intentions all over the place. Everybody wants to do something, but it's not necessarily very well articulated. We have commitments in their NDCs, National Determined Contributions, but in parallel there are other processes happening in the country, so we need to be more efficient. And we need to find innovative ways to catalyze more investments and scale. This is very important in terms of time and space. Doesn't mean that we need to think on big projects, big investments. It means that whatever investment we do, if it's a small scale, it needs to be articulated in a way that it moves another pieces of the bigger picture, like a gear. You have a small gear, say a small community-based project, but that needs to be articulated with other processes to make this bigger change. And this is what we try to do in the GCF, and this is how we see nature-based solutions. It's not a single community-based project, but it needs to be in a long-term scale and processes. So let me stop here very briefly to ask if you have any questions so far. No questions? Yes, please.
Please do ask questions, everyone. If you want, you can ask, type the questions in the chat box. Anybody's having any question in this part or any doubt, you can ask it here. Somebody has asked them.
Okay. Yes, there's one question about GCF individual projects. Yes, we do, actually. That's what we do, and this is what the examples are going to be now. I'm going to provide some examples of GCF projects, individual, or you mean by for individuals, probably is the question. But you can just write more the question if you want. So, okay, for individuals. No, we work with agencies that are partner to the fund, and now the agencies will need to find on the ground who they will who are the beneficiaries or the partners to implement those projects on the ground. Let me explain that with some examples.
Sir,
Yes, please.
could you please elaborate a little bit on NDCs, the National Determined Contribution, and how
Elaborate on NDC,
elaborate NDCs?
NDCs, and nationally determined contributions. This term, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Um, so in the context of the Paris Agreement, the agreement is actually based on the fact that countries will need to determine their own priorities in climate change, and that will be, as a whole, will contribute to the global problem of climate change. Okay, the previous agreement of the UNFCCC was the Clean Development Mechanism, in which it was in the Kyoto Protocol, when developed countries were committed to pay for the actions that developing countries will do to mitigate climate change. So you have the Clean Development Mechanism. So that was the first attempt to address climate change. So when the Kyoto Protocol ended up, then the countries discussed again under the UNFCCC Convention what to do next. And the what to do next was the Paris Agreement, in which it was not a transaction only from developed countries to developing countries, but it was actually a global effort where also developing countries will contribute to address climate change, not only for their own benefit, is not only to address their own needs, but also as a global contribution to the problem. Okay, so that's where you come with nationally determined contribution. Now, they are presented as conditional and non-conditional. Some are contributions, say a country commits, like India. Sorry, I should have read more about the NDC of India. So each country needs to submit their NDC to the UNFCCC as part of their agreement under the Paris Agreement. Okay, so a country will say in their NDC, I will reduce deforestation by 50% in 2030, and that's my contribution, because that's what is more important for my country. But my contribution is conditional. A portion of it is conditional to receive funding. If I don't receive funding, I will not be able to meet it. And another part, I will do it by myself. I will do an extra effort. I will not expect to receive funding to achieve that target. Okay, that's the NDCs. Okay, a bit more about paradigm shift. So there are different ways to understand paradigm shift. We need to understand first what is the paradigm that we want to shift. In the context of nature, the paradigm is that we don't value nature. We don't see nature as part of our economies. Anastasia was mentioning good examples of how much nature contributes to the economy, but it's actually not included in anywhere. It's not in the budgets of the countries. Barely countries are actually taking into account that. But for example, how can we value some services like water regulation or soil erosion? That's are more concrete examples. But these are not embedded into our process, into our economies. So that's the paradigm. So if we want to shift that, we need to take into account that nature is actually part of the whole system. We depend on nature to survive. So once we get that included into our policies, into our investments, into our daily basis, then we have shifted that paradigm. That's in the context of nature. What I was explaining in the case of forests was this slide. The paradigm we want to shift is that in order to have more agricultural production, you need to deforest. That's the paradigm, but we need to shift that. And the shift is no, we can supply more agriculture without deforesting. Okay, that's the paradigm shift that we need to see for these investments to be sustainable. Okay, was it clear or you need more explanation, or you have a different view actually, perhaps. Somebody has a different view, what's your understanding of these concepts?
Thank you.
No? Okay, let me provide some examples, and it might be that we will have more time than we thought, and well, you will be free to ask more questions, and of course, anytime. Some examples of what we've done so far. This is a project that was approved a month ago or less, a couple of weeks ago. It's a very nice project in Cote d'Ivoire of improving the capacities of the local community to have a better cocoa production. In Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana are the countries that produce, I think, 80 or 90% of the cocoa worldwide. But that demand, so much demand for cocoa, that led to the increased deforestation in the country. And actually, these are the two countries with the highest deforestation worldwide. So the countries have lost most of their forests because of the demand for cocoa. Again, that's the paradigm. In order to, if we have high demand for a product, and the countries, of course, the communities living in these countries have to also generate any source of income to survive, to maintain their livelihoods, to bring the kids to the schools and so on. But if they don't have the proper capacities or proper integration into the market, they will deforest. Now, this project is trying to address that. That's the shift that we want to address. Let's work with the communities. Let's improve the production of cocoa, but without deforesting. How we do that? We do it with agroforestry systems. So we don't cut the entire forest. We will use the areas that were already deforested, and we will plant trees between them. And once the trees are grown, then we move to another deforested land. So these forests are restored, and you keep cocoa production, and so on. Now, the benefit of that is that there is a market. And now this is what part of the shifts that are happening. This paradigm, there is a market that is willing to pay for that. They will pay more for the cocoa that is being produced without deforestation. And you will see, I mean, if once you now start getting your products from the shop, see if you find these products that are with the label saying deforestation free. And this is what this project is trying to address, to produce cocoa and send it to from small farmers and sell it to big markets who are paying a premium for not deforesting. Okay, and that's an incentive. So if this works, other communities will feel incentivized to do the same. So that's part of the paradigm shift. We need to replicate, we need to expand. It cannot be a single project, it needs to catalyze more action. This is another project in Peru. This actually was the first project ever that was approved by the fund in 2015. And here is a wetland that is in the Amazon. But because, and this is another, going back to the paradigm shift, the Ministry of Agriculture in Peru just saw this area as an empty land without any value. So they thought, okay, great, we'll do palm oil here. Perfect, we will have production, income, and industry, and it's good for the economy. And they had the plan to transform this ecosystem into a palm oil plantation. However, in this ecosystem lives indigenous communities. Many of them, they depend on the fish that they get from these waters. And of course, all this ecosystem is a wetland, regulates the water variation of the river, but it's a huge carbon storage as well, like in Indonesia or in mangroves, under the organic material that is under the wetlands and the roots and accumulated, it stores a lot of carbon. And when it's cut, it's all released, and it's much more than cutting a forest. And that was terrible. So again, the paradigm was that for the Ministry of Agriculture, this was not a priority. The ecosystem services and nature was not important. For them, it was an empty area to plant agriculture, palm oil. So this project tries to address that. So it empowers the communities for them to have businesses that are based on nature. like selling the fishes, selling the fruits like they can collect from this land, and so on. And it still is being under execution. Okay. Another project that I like, this is in Ecuador, and this picture is because here are the president and all his ministers at that time to start opening this project, and it was targeted to strengthen the capacities of indigenous communities. This is the sign of this political will that I was mentioning before. It's important to have this strong political will for these investments in nature to be sustainable. And this is a project to support the reduction of emissions from deforestation by assisting the native communities, but also making the beef production more sustainable. So the idea is to, I'm a beef farmer, and I need 100 hectares to have 10 cows. So what they will give you with this project is, okay, let's do like this. Let's use only 50 hectares, and we will make we will use improved grass to make it more nutritious. So you will have the same amount of cows in half of the area. So you will reduce deforestation. And this is what is being promoted by this project, and the intention is to expand into the entire Amazon in Ecuador. This is also another, all of these are my favorite projects, so I just picked some of them, but this is the one that I also like a lot. This is a project in Morocco, where I'm pretty sure you know argan oil, right? It's very very much used for cosmetics and shampoo and all these things. That has created a lot of demand. This is a product that comes from a tree, from a seed of a tree, the argan tree. But that demand is been so high that all the seeds were collected, harvested, and sold to the market. And that caused the deterioration of the forest, because the forest was not able to recover because there were no seeds, there was no regeneration. And in addition to that, when the communities get more income, they start buying goats, and the goats were eating the trees. So it was very damaging. If we continue that process, at the end of the day, there would not be trees to sustain these economies. And of course, you will lose all the ecosystem services around it, biodiversity, soil erosion, and so on. And what is cool about this project is that this is entirely run by women organizations. And they are the ones collecting the seeds, processing the seeds, having a transformation plant of the seeds. So it's a purely women-based industry at the community level. So what we do with this project is to restore these forests and to establish new plantation of argan trees for keeping these livelihoods, but also engaging with the private sector. How do we measure the impact? So we have two types of measures. One is since we are a climate fund, we need to measure the impacts on mitigation in tons of CO2. And here you can see in the example here, we have the tons of CO2 that will be sequestered, actually, not avoided, sequestered by the trees. So when a tree grows, like any other plant, what they do is to take the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and based on the photosynthesis, they transform these CO2 molecules from the atmosphere and turn them into sugars, and then into the roots, leaves, branches, and that's where the carbon is stored. So when we invest in, like in this case, in restoring these argan trees, these trees will sequester the carbon. And how do we measure? The other measurement we use is a number of people that are involved into these projects. So the beneficiaries that will be increasing their livelihoods or be more resilient because of these investments. These are our two main measures of impact. Another example, it is a very cool project in Madagascar. It's facing some challenges because it was too innovative at that time, but the idea was to put into a mix of investments, and this is more an innovation of how to catalyze private investments. And since investing in conservation is not the most profitable investment from a private sector perspective. I will invest in energy, in agriculture, and others, but in conservation, not really. So what we did in this project was to create a financial facility, like a fund that has baskets, one for conservation, agriculture, energy, and so others, all climate related. But the investors will get benefits in average for the whole product. So if you have high return of energy and low returns in conservation, then you will get still the same share of benefits across all these investments. So the innovation of this project was actually more on the investment type more than the interventions. But the idea was to bring more private sector into conservation activities. Finally, this is another very cool project that I like a lot here in the neighborhood, because here is also a very paradigm shifting project. Here, a country, Bhutan, well, it's a unique example, but it's a good one. The country decided to keep in conservation 50% of the land of the entire country. So you remember the graph of forest transition. Let me see, where is it? It's here, no? The forest transition curve, where I was showing what happens when deforestation occurs in a country starts losing their forests, and then it recovers. And the shift is that the country should keep their forests and keep developing. That's what Bhutan is doing. They said, okay, we are not going to cut 51% of the country will be in conservation. We're not cutting it. And how they will finance that is the interesting part, because what they do is to export hydro energy to India, Bangladesh, and the neighboring countries. And instead of investing those resources from exporting hydro energy into infrastructure, like creating cities, buildings, roads, they will reinvest in nature, because actually it's nature the one that is providing that hydro energy. Is because of the water that comes from these national parks that you have that power to generate energy and sell it to the other countries. And this is another paradigm shifting concept, because what happened in many developing countries, I'm also coming from Peru, and these things happen, is that you don't value that. Instead of, if you get a hydropower plant, instead of investing in protecting the forest that assure the provision of water, you do the opposite. You cut everything to put infrastructure, and then that damages your investments, and in the long term, it's not sustainable. So Bhutan is doing this, but it takes time until they can have all these funds available to keep their forests. So we are providing a transition fund for 14 years that every year we will disperse once the country provides fund from the export of their hydro energy to this conservation fund. So every time we will be dispersing less, and less. And when the countries start getting more revenues, they will be covering all the expenses. So once we finish the project, this will be managed entirely by their own domestic resources. So they will not depend from the international cooperation. And with that, that's basically it. I think we efficiently managed less time that we had, but we are very happy to discuss more or answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Juan, for an interesting lecture. It surely has expanded our idea of Green Climate Fund, because not much is known. Like, we didn't know how it works, or in such, like, you have explained it to us very nicely. If students, it's like the house is open for the questions. If anyone is having any doubt or any questions regarding anything, you can ask here. In the meantime, I want to ask you, can you tell us, like, in case any of the students, or it is just regarding the projects that are being funded by the Green Climate Fund, as someone already asked, that like individuals can also can we do it, like, others non-profit organizations, or
Yeah,
some industries who work except for the individuals, or the
yeah, yeah,
institutions for like the institutions we are in IPCW. So can we also like, right, some students, a group of students or researchers can apply for some restoration projects uh,
yeah,
for
yeah,
the Green Climate Fund under that?
yeah. So the way we operate is that given that our projects are significantly large, sometimes the project that's the micro project for us is below 10 million. A small project is below 50 million US dollars. Uh, and a large project is 250 millions and more. Okay,
Okay.
so so these are significantly large projects, and for that we need to have agencies
Okay.
that have been accredited to the fund that can comply to the safeguards, fiduciary standards, and so on. So on.
Okay.
Now, these agencies are like the World Bank or the
Mm-hmm.
UN agencies, FAO, but then they will execute these projects with other partners. So a local NGO can
Yeah.
be one of the executing of these projects, but the submission needs to come from these agencies that are accredited.
Okay. Okay. So exactly, I wanted to ask the procedure if someone wants, so how it should go. Just like that.
Yeah, well, in the countries in India, you will have we have NABARD, for example,
Yes,
is
yes, yes.
accredited. They have already experience with the GCF, and they can submit projects to us, so anyone can approach them and through them submit a project to us.
Okay. Thank you so much. And one, we have got many questions from other participants as well. They have written in the chat box. You can take the questions, one from there.
Yeah, I see one question on the chat on.
Two questions. It's Naveen Kumar
Yeah,
Tiwari. Naveen is asking the question.
yeah, no, that's a very good question. And so beef production is indeed, you have large methane, but most of the deforestation in the Amazon is because of beef production. And it's a very interesting thing about this, how politics play into this example of beef. So what happened when the US and China were fighting, or they're still fighting, they create this tension, but prior to that, most of the beef consumed in China was coming from the US, okay? And the US had their own regulations how they will produce beef there. But when they start discussing, the high demand for beef in China moved to the Amazon. And now is Brazil one of the ones that produces most of the beef for China. And based on that demand, deforestation increased significantly because in Brazil, they didn't put, again, the political will finish with this new president, Bolsonaro. The previous presidents, at least two or three, had this commitment to keep deforestation low. But with the new president, who had other motivations, they didn't care about the regulations to keep deforestation low. On the contrary, they opened and deforestation increased. So there is a connection also how international policy plays today into the generation of emissions. Now the idea to beef production, there are many ways. So we today the demand for beef will remain, and people, as economies also increases, people with more resources will go for buying more meat. And so what we need to do is we cannot say that everybody should become should not eat beef. No, it's not going to happen. So we need to take an approach where, okay, we have to produce still, but let's make it in a different way. So in terms of methane, when you have these improved grasslands that will generate less enteric fermentation on the cows to generate less methane, for example. You have also silvopastures where you introduce trees in a grassland, so you increase forest cover, you reduce deforestation pressure, but also with the shade of the trees, the beeves will have less exhaustion, so they will increase mass, so you can have you don't need much space for having your beefs more better feeded. And maybe I'm expanding too much with the beef. Okay, then there was another question on GCF in India. Maybe I will ask my colleague Anastasia if you can do the search in the meantime of the GCF projects funded in India. We had from NABARD. I remember we had one in coastal restoration of mangroves. Let me check. I was not in charge of those projects, but we had some India projects. While my colleague Anastasia is searching, I will answer the next question in the meantime. Climate funding related to air and water conservation. That's also very cool. And on water conservation, we have some projects that are trying to restore the groundwater by treating the water that's been consumed in the cities and then reinserting them into groundwater. We have projects that are restoring watersheds. So what you have is in a watershed-based approaches, what you have is that because of deforestation or the loss of vegetation, there's more erosion. So this runoff, it's also causing landslides and you get less drinkable water because of the high content of sediments. So what we do is to do the restoration of the heads of the watersheds to avoid those landslides. What it's also very cool, and we haven't done so far, is to take into account the atmospheric water circulation. Because what happens with climate change is not only about emissions, but it's also about modifying the ecosystem services. What you have, for example, the Amazon and other large tropical forests, when the evaporation happens from the leaves and the trees, all this humidity goes to the atmosphere, and because of the wind directions and atmospheric circulation, that turns into, it's called atmospheric rivers. And all this water is moving through the atmosphere, and that movement works like an air conditioning of the planet. So when we deforest, we're also cutting that service, and we are increasing the temperature of the land. So it's not only about the emissions and the radiation from the sun, but it's also that we are turning off the air conditioning of the planet if we don't take into account the atmospheric water circulation. But we don't have we don't have any example actually in the world. There isn't any case so far, and we look forward to develop that. Let me check with Anastasia. Anastasia, did you find any in the database the projects approved in India?
I see currently in the pipeline there are 3 projects, and out of them is one is on energy, another one is on sanitation, and only one might be involving nature-based solutions. The name is Increasing Climatic Resilience of Urban Water Management System of Hyderabad. But it's difficult to see from here if it's involving maybe some green spaces or some constructed wetlands or something.
Yeah, so we have 3 approved projects. One is on groundwater recharge and solar microirrigation, and one is increasing resilience in coastal ecosystems. It was in Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, and Odisha. So we do have some examples of projects in India, and we can invite you to look at our page. I will search. Actually, I will send you the link of our projects in the chat. And then we have another question. Nepal's reconstruction project of an earthquake-damaged temple called Rani has been controversial for its lack of sustainable source of water, especially artificial ponds surrounding. This is chronic water scarcity. I'm curious to know your views of nature-based solutions that could have been adopted instead. Well, water conservation is actually a need. In what you are totally right is sometimes we don't take into account the functioning of the ecosystem in terms of the supply and the sources of water. And it would need to be probably the suggestion here is to look at where is the source. Where does the water come from originally? If it's a rain-fed system, or it is a system based on diversion of tributaries, so you can tell what problem to address. Now, if it's a rain-fed system, probably the way forward is to build on water reservoirs, and we've been doing that also. Some cases where, in absence of where to accumulate water coming from the rain, we have built reservoirs. Or actually, this is not necessarily an NBS; it's actually a gray infrastructure. But it has been, there are traditional practices, and I remember I saw in India as well some of these the formations that you do on the ground to allow the rainfall to maintain for longer period of time. So it also allows slower recovery of the groundwater. I can imagine. I don't know exactly the example that you're providing of the Nepal's reconstruction project, but maybe that could work. Challenges of an island nation different to a partially or completely landlocked country in terms of climate change. That's a good question, and maybe I'm talking too much. Let me check with my colleague Anna if you want to take any of the questions.
Well, I'm fine with you answering. But as for you mean question on island nations?
You can.
Yeah, well, I can just very the most serious impact is from sea level rise, because now the problem is the island developing states is that they're actually slowly disappearing underwater. In countries like Bangladesh, it's especially serious problem. So they have a lot of people living out there, having their houses, agricultural land, and they're all submerging underwater. But not only developing countries, it's also goes the same for developed countries. Even in the US, for example, the city of New York in the nearest 60 years might be almost completely underwater.
Yeah.
So I think it's a problem also that the coastal countries, not only island nations.
Yeah, another challenge for what I've seen actually in a recent article was about of freshwater availability, because also when we're making so many changes in our climate, the distribution of rainfall is changing as well, and it is one probable scenario where rainfall that was coming to some islands may not come. So the availability of fresh water will be much more restricted. And even there are discussions of importing water on boats to send it to ships, to send it to some islands. So it's crazy what's happening actually in the context of some islands. And also in terms of energy, so many of these have no other chance to rely on fossil fuel energy, of combustion energy to generate, of combustion engines to generate energy. So it's inevitable in some cases. So we are trying to create projects with solar or geothermal energy for these islands. Of a landlocked country, what you have in a landlocked country is actually more than the climate problems will be the same as a landlocked or not. Landlocked is more a geopolitical ways to deal with the problem, because in countries that have access to the oceans, they will have a probably more diversified sources of income, and they may rely on different productivities different commodity production of commodities during different points of time. But landlocked countries, they have not many options. So when any changes in climate and patterns of temperature or rainfall, they have no chance. They have no ways to diversify or modify their economies. So they have less alternatives to deal with the problems, less chances to adapt.
Yeah, I also intruded one more thing that I thought about. So as for island nations, when they are surrounded with water and with increased hydrological cycle due to climate change, they will experience all those climate hazards and extremes like typhoons. Well, we in South Korea see already the third typhoon in 2 weeks. Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, usually these nations, even before, they faced a lot of more natural disasters, but with climate changes, these disasters will become much more frequent and intense, and island nations will hit first.
Yeah. Now the question on planning a sustainable development approach in financially backward countries gets difficult. Indeed, it's very difficult because what also happens in many countries is the priorities. If you are a politician and the concerns of the country, of the immediate needs of the country are education, health, infrastructure, you will not look at nature, or you will not do a planning on sustainable development looking at nature. Again, this is what I was saying before. If we see this different, it's not that nature is the concept has evolved. Before you had the environmentalists and some group of hippies talking about trees and so on. But now this is much more embedded into our policies. And that's how we should look at. But indeed, it's also important to acknowledge that the priorities of the countries are different. And that's where GCF, institutions like the GF can contribute, because if I have a country with limited budget, if I'm in a country with limited budget, then my investments will go to the immediate needs. Maybe, as I said, in health or education. I will not invest in creating a protected area, a national park. But probably that investment is a long-term return for giving me a better environment to have less diseases, right? Maybe because of having so much deforestation, I was able to create a new microclimate for different diseases to be transmitted. But I don't realize that. So I'm still trying to put hospitals, to buy medicines, and deforestation keeps increasing, and the problem keeps increasing. So once we realize that, probably we need to have the two investments, the ones that give me these immediate needs, and for the other ones is where the GCF can support to complement that vision, that paradigm shift in development, not only one. Okay, so these are very cool questions. Thank you so much, because we barely have the time to discuss much about what we do. We usually are working like hamsters on a daily basis and moving from one project to the other, but now this was a good opportunity. I'm not sure if there are more questions here.
Yes, if anyone is having any questions, any doubts related to anything, you can ask now. It's really an interesting session. It was really interesting, and you beautifully told us about the nature-based solutions. It has increased our awareness about it. We didn't know some new informations were added to our like vocabulary, like tidal flats. I didn't know the tidal flats and the restoration of peatlands, how they can enhance the carbon sequestration a lot. It's really great, and I'm sure the solutions that you have given and the examples of the various projects funded by the Green Climate Fund, like the wetland restoration, the plantation of the area for the palm production of the palm oil. It's really great. So like, and the sustainable landscapes in eastern Madagascar, to name a few. And I have been to Bhutan. It's a beautiful country, and it's so great to see the people are so much aware on the environmental protection, and they know how they can restore their happiness by becoming green. They are actually carbon neutral country. So like countries like so I want to add a point on that. When we were talking about the island nations, the island nations themselves are doing their bit in their protection. I have been to Maldives. It's a small island nation and it is bearing the brunt of the climate change. So they are working. So the beaches were so clean. They were not at all using any plastic anywhere. They're totally following the sustainable lifestyle when they are just small islands and they have to travel transport a lot of things. Then also when they can manage, because they're bearing the brunt of what other developed nations or developing in other countries are doing, which are much safer than that. So all of us would have to be aware of what we like, what actually climate change is happening. It's not a hoax, or it's not something which is going to come in future. Like, it is currently here and we are the only generation that we can do something about it. I think that's very much like sure. And I just wanted to ask like few students would also want to ask if like if someone wants to work with the green climate fund, so like how it can be done with that. How can we do that if we want to get associated with the green climate fund or work with
Yeah,
that?
yeah, of course. I mean, we have in our page, um, I'm sending the link now. There we
Okay.
have always needs of different skill sets, and there are, for
Thank you.
those who are starting their career, they start like internships, or
Yes.
people who are much more technically experienced. Um, they go into some technical areas. We work also with governments, so we have a lot of relationship managers, people who need to discuss and understand what are the country's needs. At the moment, we have around 200 staff. We have 250 positions, so we should be recruiting next year around 40 more. And probably the organization will keep growing. Depends how it goes.
Yes, for organizations like this must grow. We need more people to help our earth to heal or to rejuvenate, I'm sure. And thank you so much. That was such an enlightening and stimulating lecture. Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Anastasia. And I have got, and I am sure the participants here would have got really good ideas about some of the projects that you have talked about. We would like to, some of us would also like to, uh, like, uh, like to work with you or with the Green Climate Fund. We would like to apply for the projects for the restoration of the degraded ecosystems or like that. Thank you so much on behalf of IP community, IP college community, University of Delhi, and all the participants and faculty members present here. I would like to extend my gratitude to you for such an enlightening talk and for accepting our invite. We are honored. We are honored to have you with us today. We are looking forward for such more collaborations if we can have you people for new, for the for like for the capacity building of new people and sensitization of new people to work in the field of restoration of the climate change. Thank you so much. Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Anastasia.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you very
No, it
much as
was
well.
really interesting. It was pleasure listening to you both. It was
Thank you very
really
much.
Thank
an
you.
informative
Thank you.
session. Thank you, everyone.
It's been a
Thank you
pleasure.
and have a great day.
Have a great
You too
day.
have a great day. You both.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Bye bye.
Bye. So the participants may leave now. And guys, I hope it was a very informative session. So you have got to know you can also work in the field of environmental restoration on individual basis or with the help of some organization. If you want to, you can apply. So we have, Juan has given the link. You can now you know how you can apply if you want to work with the Green Climate Fund, and definitely on various projects, how can you apply for them? So please do use this link for that. And now, as you know that today, from today onwards, we have started the, global climate change and waste management theme. So we'll be having the next lecture in this session will be on 10th. So please be there, and we'll be uploading the assignment of the third week as well, third and fourth week together. So basically, we want you guys, before the final day of this course, we want you to submit all of your assignments. So we'll be giving, today we'll upload the assignment of the third and the fourth theme together. So you'll have to submit one assignment together. So please do it by 14. So in order to get the certificates on time. So all the best. And for any further information, if you have any query, you can ask. This is the right time to ask. Or if you want, you can also mail us on the email IDs, and also keep a tab on the course website. Okay? Nobody wants to ask anything? So, okay, we'll stop here. You may leave now.
Hello, good evening, ma'am. This is Archana, ma'am.
Anji, boliye, Arjuna.
Ma'am, actually, I want to inform you that, ma'am, from last 1 week, my phone was not with me, due to which I couldn't able to attend last few days
Okay,
seminars and all this lecture.
okay,
Moreover, ma'am, I am not able to submit my assignment 1 and 2 just because I am not having my mail ID with me, as my phone went for service center. Ma'am, I
okay.
request